regulate the prescription drugs. NPR's Sarah McCammon has more.
The lawsuit from a coalition of abortion rights opponents asked a federal judge appointed by former President Trump to overturn the Food and Drug Administration's approval of the abortion pill mifepristone. Speaking to abortion rights advocates, Vice President Harris described the suit as a political attack designed to undermine the decisions of doctors and scientists.
This is not just an attack on women's fundamental freedoms. It is an attack on the very foundation of our public health system.
Harris noted that the drug was deemed safe and effective by the FDA more than 20 years ago. She promised to take unspecified steps to fight for abortion access. Sarah McCammon, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR.
This is KUOW News. I'm Kevin Kniested in Seattle. COVID-19 remains present, but the threat has decreased, in large part due to the tools now available to combat the virus. Speaking at a public health lab in King County this week, CDC Director Rochelle Lewinsky said the best way to prevent severe illness or death remains staying up to date with vaccines. But she acknowledges that disparities in who is getting vaccines are still present.
And so much of the work that is equally important to the basic science of how well that vaccine works is how well we are able to work with communities to demonstrate the value of that vaccine to those communities, to those individuals, and get vaccines in arms.
State public health officials acknowledge more needs to be done to lower disparities in access and uptake. Just under 36% of eligible people in Washington who are white have had the updated Omicron vaccine. That number is far lower for people in communities of color. Did Governor Inslee exceed his authority when he declared a statewide eviction moratorium during the pandemic? State Supreme Court justices heard arguments in a legal challenge at Seattle University on Thursday.
There was nothing in the proclamation that erased or minimized the obligation of tenants to pay rent. In fact, on the face of the proclamation, it encouraged tenants to pay rent.
That's Washington Deputy Solicitor General Christina Sepe arguing for the state. Richard Stevens represents the Washington Landlord Association and says the moratorium interfered with legitimate business.
I can tell you that my clients, some of their tenants are gone. They're long gone, and there is no state money available to reimburse them.
Stevens argued that grocery stores, for example, were not forced to provide free food to people. The state argued that the moratorium softened the economic blow of the pandemic by providing stable housing and provided adequate protections and remedies to landlords. And the Seattle Mariners take on the San Diego Padres this afternoon in Arizona for their first preseason game. The OL Reign take on Club America in a preseason friendly tomorrow at 7:30 at Starfire Stadium. This is KUOW News.
Supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 25,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public.
Welcome to Week in Review. I'm Mike Lewis, filling in for Bill Radke. Joining us today is Publicola co-founder and publisher Erica Barnett. Erica, welcome to Week in Review again.
Great to be here, Mike.
Side note, while both Eric and I have been reporters in this town for 2 decades, it took us 2 years to figure out we live across the street from each other.
Also, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. 2 weeks ago. Also joining us today is freelance health reporter Joanne Silberner. Joanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And lastly, but never leastly, KUOW arts and culture reporter Mike Davis. Mike, not only thanks for sitting in with us, but thank you for helping us meet the show's minimum required mic count.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Great to be here with you, Mike.
So we had this week, and obviously we're going to lean pretty heavily on Erica on this first segment. Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell gave his second State of the City address. He broadly outlined his optimistic vision for the city. So it solved pervasive issues with the unhoused, with crime, while maintaining a civic effort toward fairness and equity and how it solves these problems. This is a little bit of what he had to say.
I'm bullish on downtown. Let me say it again. I am bullish on our downtown. 100,000 residents, over 320,000 jobs, the undisputed economic engine and cultural hub of our region.
All right. So while idealistic, the speech did get a little bit of pushback. Erica, you spent enough time in City Hall to legally establish homesteader rights, and you've listened to more states of the city than anyone should endure. Your story in Publicola frames the speech as long on platitudes, but a little short on substance. Can you walk us through what the speech had and what it lacked?
Yeah, I mean, I was in the room for this speech, which was a nice change from pandemic era speeches. And so I got a sense of, and, my headline was the state of the city is vibes. And, I meant in part by that the vibes in the room were great. People were really happy with the speech. A guy behind me just kept going, strong finish after the end of it. And so it was a very positive reception. But on reflection and, looking at what he actually said, there's not a lot new there. I mean, a lot of it was very similar to his first State of the City speech made, before he'd really started as mayor and gotten going. We're gonna revitalize downtown. We're gonna deal with homelessness. We're going to improve public safety. And things are going to be great and getting better. And, I mean, when he says he's bullish on downtown, the things that he actually talked about were all very speculative and very kind of in the may do category as opposed to the plan category. He said the city may think about doing conversions of office space into housing downtown, and there's going to be some sort of design contest for that. There may be an arts district that may be happening. It could even mean a 24/7 street. And as a friend who was watching the speech online texted me, this all sounds great. Too bad none of it's ever going to happen. So that was kind of my takeaway. A lot of talk about bold action, but the actual kind of substantive proposals were things like, I'm going to have a plan to plant trees. We're finally going to get the white paper out that was due last year for this new public safety department. And a lot of we're planning to have a plan.
Mike, let me throw this to you for just a quick moment. Is it actually fair to judge a politician's speech on its platitude to substance ratio, or don't we kind of expect some of this when somebody gets up to talk to us, especially a public figure?
A little bit of both. I mean, come on. When Bruce Harrell gives a speech at the end, we all want to put our hands in the middle and then cheer ourselves out. That he delivers a great speech. But I think that, Erica literally took my notes. She could have read my notes off of my paper. More money for cops, more foot traffic downtown, less visible homelessness. That's what he campaigned on. That's what he promised. Now, however you feel about those ideas specifically, I think it's fair to say he hasn't really delivered no matter which side of the fence you're on. Like, encampments are still everywhere. Downtown is still struggling to get back going. Right. So it's like,
Well, let me ask to Joanne then. Is there, when you are downtown, and I assume you're downtown from time to time, when you are downtown, have you seen anything different over the past 2 years? Does it look like a different downtown to you than it did sort of at the peak of the pandemic?
No, not really. Stores are closed. Things are better now that people aren't, actively out in the streets protesting, but I don't see much happening. And that brings up the public safety department. We're at a white paper on that. Hasn't that been in the works since Jenny Durkin?
Mike, yeah.
Downtown has changed. As the arts reporter in the room, I can tell you, I'm downtown all the time. I go to plays all the time. I go to galleries all the time. That stuff is back open. Now, if we're talking about revenue, if we're talking about the economy, if we're talking about tourism getting back to where
How about just the optics? How about when you walk through downtown, does it look different to you now than it did 2 years ago? Or does it look the same as it did in 2019?
When you leave Pioneer Square, yes.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And I work in Pioneer Square and heading down there later today. And yeah, it feels different. I think that a lot of this kind of Seattle is dying, Seattle is dead stuff is overblown. If you read about it in the newspaper, Nike closing. How many of us went to the Nike store on a regular basis? But the feel is different, and it does feel more lively. It's not dead like at 5 o'clock at night, like it was, frankly, when I moved here 20 years ago. It's not 100% back, but I, like I said, I work Pioneer Square actually feels better. It feels, it feels more lively. And it never felt scary to me, but it did feel very vacant and windswept and like tumbleweeds blowing through. And it doesn't feel that way to me as much anymore.
It's funny that you say that, because I've never felt unsafe either. And I think my pushback on the Seattle is dying crowd is that they're trying to solve problems with unrealistic solutions. They want to take all of our resources and like give them to the police and scare people from walking around downtown, when for folks like myself who spend a lot of time down there, it's not as scary as they try to make people believe.
Well, I don't know that it's scary, but I just walked through there on the way here and there's nobody there.
Well, let me ask this though. I mean, to your point exactly, and let me throw this at Erica. How much solution, and Bruce Harrell has been talking about this for a while, how much solution are we embedding in this idea of employees coming back to downtown? I mean, are we depending disproportionately on this to solve a whole bunch of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about the speech is I think that the mayor wanted to have it both ways. He wants to say we're going to do things like have more housing downtown because office workers are not necessarily coming back. But he also applauded the fact that Amazon workers are now being forced to go back to work over many people's objections 3 days a week. He's really into the idea of bringing more city workers back for more days. And so, I think in his heart, does Bruce Harrell believe that the future of downtown is kind of like the past? I think he does. I think that, this sort of feels to him and a lot of people at the city like a temporary blip, and that people are just going to go back to normal. But I don't think that's very likely. And, neither do a lot of economists who are much smarter about this stuff than I am.
Well, getting into the real people part of it, do we really think this Amazon thing is going to happen? Are they going to come back 3 days a week?
Well, I don't know that they're going to have, some of the employees are not going to have much of a choice. I mean, I think that this is, as an aside, John Cook at GeekWire once made, I think, a really excellent point about this, that he sees this larger thing as the tech industry resetting what employee expectations should be. Like they're taking advantage of a dip in the economy and saying, hey, the world is changing for you. Let us show you how. And the back to work is some of that. But Mike?
I think that where we stand right now is somewhere in the middle of what Joanne and Erica are saying. I think that at night, there are things to do downtown. There are plays, there are shows, there are events. But I also think that if you go downtown right now, it will be dead. And I used to work in Pioneer Square, and I can tell you, during the lunch hour, you used to have to wait in line at every single restaurant. Like you walk by the bus stops, there were just people everywhere. And there was a vibrancy downtown when everyone was coming to work 40 hours a week. Hybrid isn't going to solve that. Hybrid isn't going to bring that back. I don't think we'll ever be to that place where you're walking downtown during the lunch hour.
Pushing through crowds.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, so let's talk then about embedded within the mayor's speech is this idea, the plan, and Erica knows a lot about this, the Partnership for Zero. The initiative is about dealing with the persistent problem of the unhoused in Seattle and hopefully maybe the crime that is related to that, and maybe the crime that is not related to that. Erica, can you talk us a little bit through Partnership for Zero and how it appears to be evolving over the course of the last couple of years?
Yeah, so Partnership for Zero is this partnership that was launched a little over a year ago that is a public-private partnership. A bunch of corporations and foundations gave money, a total pledge of $10 million, although only about half of that has been budgeted, to essentially eliminate visible homelessness downtown by taking everyone who's living in tents and on the streets and getting them into permanent housing. That was the plan. And the idea was to hire a bunch of system navigators, peer navigators with lived experience of homelessness to essentially walk people through the whole process of being, unhoused, getting ID, et cetera, all the way to housing and beyond.
Take them entirely through the system.
Yep.
Right.
And that is not really what has happened so far. They're definitely, very generously, they are behind schedule. They've housed about 50 people so far out of about 1,000 that they say are living unsheltered downtown. They've put about 100 or so more into shelter, but aspects of the plan have changed. The system advocates didn't work out exactly as they had originally planned. They're learning a lot of lessons.
Let me ask a quick clarification on that. When they talk about getting people housed and they talk about another group of people that are put into shelter, let us know, what do you mean by the distinction between the two?
Right. Well, the original idea, as I understand it, is that they were going to be housed and that people were going to be offered 3 different housing options, like 3 different apartments, and they would go around and show them these apartments and they would pick one. And that was never a very practical idea to do on the time frame, like within a year. which is what they originally planned. At this point, they were supposed to be getting close to sort of maintaining a tent-free downtown, and we're obviously nowhere near that yet.
Right.
Now they're putting more people into shelter. And that shelter is generally hotels. So they get hotel vouchers to just go stay in a hotel while they're waiting for housing to come through. So that's about 150 people total out of 1,000.
Right.
So it's a very slow process. They say that they're learning and they're, making the system more efficient and that it'll get faster. But that, all very much remains to be seen.
Well, so Mike, when you hear about this and you see that the city essentially has this sort of grand idea that has, if I understand Erica correctly, has kind of backslid into hotel vouchers, what do you think?
I think that it was always vibes. To borrow from Erica, I think they presented us with a plan that was unrealistic from like right out of the gate, and I think that it puts us in a position now where it kind of makes it hard to talk about accountability or to look at parts of this plan that fell through, because this is a plan that we never believed in. They were never going to get homelessness down to 30-ish people in a year's time.
Right.
So making an outlandish promise like that and then not delivering, we're right where we thought we would be.
And Joanne, obviously, there's a strong component of the entire unhoused situation in Seattle that is healthcare related. I mean, which would be your area of expertise. When you see the city only able to essentially 50, I think, right, Erica, 50 people actually in housing, another 100 people in 56, another 100 in shelter. I mean, what is your speculation on the outcome for the rest of the 850 people? Who are not?
Well, it's actually the same for the people who are housed now, and that's better mental health facilities around. I mean, I'm a big believer in housing first. You have to get people off the street, but then you have to address what put them on the street and what kept them on the street. And if you don't do that, they're going to end up back on the street. And then instead of the 850 plus 150, you're going to be back to the 1,000.
And to her point then, Erica, is the city addressing those underlying problems, or is the city just merely trying to move people, change the optics without changing the actual issue?
Well, I would push back on the idea that most people who are chronically homeless necessarily have severe behavioral health conditions. There's a lot of reasons people become homeless and stay homeless. And we're talking about folks that have been homeless for a long time for the most part. So, I'd push back on that a little bit. The city does not fund, health or behavioral health, but the county is putting a measure on the ballot to do crisis centers, which would allow people with, immediate crisis level mental health issues to go into a place and be seen immediately. That's on the ballot in, I believe, April. But yeah, I mean, the spending on mental health has always been, a huge, missed opportunity, in this area, and we don't do enough of it. So there's movement, but those behavioral crisis centers are not going to produce that many new beds, and we're losing beds all the time.
We've had initiatives before. They just were promises to beef up mental health access, and I just don't see it making a difference.
When we look at Partnership for Zero, for example, it's not the only zero-based initiative on the agenda with the city. During the previous administration, the city lost Vision Zero, which was a plan to try to eliminate traffic accidents. And some of this actually has directly to do with the number of accidents in downtown, eliminate traffic accidents, particularly pedestrian cyclist deaths in the city. And broadly, the plan was to change crosswalk signs and enhance pedestrian safety, to lower speed limits, to add speed bumps. But in subsequent years, and this is a little bit similar to the Partnership for Zero, the rates have actually gotten worse since Vision Zero was launched. So the city did, as cities do, it launched a self-examination of Vision Zero. The examination, rather than backing away from the program, doubled down on it. The conclusion of the just released assessment, and thank you, Erica, for pointing that out, the just released assessment of Vision Zero is, in effect, more Vision Zero. Erica, you are a person who walks around Seattle. What worked with Vision Zero? Do you feel safer as a pedestrian?
I mean, there certainly are some things in here that I think have really helped, particularly this thing called leading pedestrian intervals, which is, basically when you get a walk signal, you can walk before the cars go, which gives them a little time to notice you so they don't hit you. I think those have been really successful, and they do talk about doubling down on that. But I mean, this report is basically like, we did a good job, but not enough of a good job. Right. And it's not really, they called it a top to bottom review. And that's the actual title of the report, which I find kind of comical. But, it's not, I mean, it's a lot of backslapping and self-congratulation. The momentum building actions that they propose, there's 5 of them for the near term. And the first one is to maybe think about some more no right on reds downtown in time for tourist
State is looking
season.
at that as also, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, in this particular one, it's so limited. It's literally downtown and it says tourist season and in time for Major League Baseball All-Star game. So it's like so small ball, to use a sports metaphor, which I'm sure Bruce Harrell would appreciate. That, I don't really, it's nothing. I mean, as Tammy Morales, city council member, pointed out, there's nothing about road design that allows people to drive so fast and makes it, feel safe to drive fast. There's nothing in here about sort of big substantive changes. It's like, let's have, more no right on red signals. Let's have more of these, kind of small scale action items focused on people's individual behavior, which isn't ultimately the problem.
All right, Mike, I'm going to throw it to you. We've talked about 2 city programs with 0 in the title and 0 in the mission statement. 0 isn't in the results. In some cases, it's trended farther from 0 than before the initiative. Just, should we stop using 0 in our operating language? Do we have an overpromising problem here?
I think we do. I think we have a hashtag problem. I think it's one Seattle, it's Vision Zero, it's all of these snappy phrases that sound cool but don't actually lead to anything. No, we shouldn't call any of this 0 because we're not even headed to 0. What are we doing?
We may be headed the other direction from 0. When you look at at Vision Zero, anyone here on the panel, do any of you feel like it's been fundamentally safer? I would say one thing that in the Vision Zero, I do a lot of walking in Seattle. I do a lot of walking in downtown, as you do, Mike. And I do think that the delay on the stoplight delay, different from the pedestrian crossing delay, has actually been kind of effective. I think that people getting out into the intersection, weirdly enough, makes them safer because they're not stepping off the curb and into traffic. I'm not sure what else about Vision Zero actually has worked. Do any of you feel fundamentally safer when you're walking around Seattle now than you did prior to Vision Zero?
Only what you mentioned. And that's because that's so noticeable. I
Right.
know people who have no idea what Vision Zero is, but they notice that delay, and that delay is helpful. But once we get outside of that, I don't got much for you.
Erica?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that they tout a bunch in this report is lowering speed limits to 25 miles an hour. And if you're on Aurora or Rainier Avenue South, that speed limit is essentially meaningless. Like, it might as well just be, say, 52. I mean,
excellent point. Right.
I mean, you can put as many signs, you can have as many billboard campaigns as you want, but it's not going to change behavior if you don't narrow the road and slow people down.
Traffic enforcement is not really matching what the city's changing as far as regulation goes. So also contained, and this is in the backdrop to Bruce Harrell's speech, is this idea of rethinking downtown. There's an interesting story. GeekWire reporters Kurt Schlosser and Taylor Soper this week went out in search of these ideas to revitalize downtown, and they talked to architects and civic planners and activists, and the people who feast on a diet of pie in the sky ideas, such as ordinary ones like make downtown safer, make it more affordable, add childcare, to a complete revamping of how we think about outdoor spaces with rooftop gardens and sky bridges. Mike, when you look at these ideas, do any of them seem like a possible path forward for Seattle?
Making living downtown affordable, I think, is something that could really work. I think for families that have been priced out, for folks who would be interested in living there if they didn't think you had to be rich or in the tech industry to be able to do so. I also think creating artist lofts would be a great idea down there. Getting more creatives that actually live downtown would increase the vibrancy of the neighborhood just by having them living in those neighborhoods. So I definitely take the arts approach to that question.
Let me ask you a follow-up on this then. And so getting the creatives downtown, I would assume you would see this as fundamentally linked to making it more affordable, correct?
Absolutely.
I mean, how do you get a group of people who don't make a lot of money with their
Yes.
work.
Well, that's a big issue in the arts community in Seattle right now, is the fact that artists who want to work in Seattle can't afford to live in Seattle. And they're always looking for housing opportunities that are like earmarked for artists. If we put some of those in downtown, I think that it would also create opportunities to invite people who don't live downtown to come back downtown by having more opportunities for arts and cultural experiences.
Well, does anybody think the social housing initiative that just passed, is that going to make a difference?
Great question.
I hope so. It sounds to me like it's a plan to make a plan. Like we voted and now somebody's going to come in and create a plan, but it would be nice if it actually went somewhere.
It's a plan for a group to make a plan.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, realistically, the social housing public developer is probably not going to be building downtown. Downtown's pretty built up. I mean, and it's, can also acquire housing, but that's probably also going to be, smaller scale housing in places like Capitol Hill. So I don't know that it'll necessarily have a direct impact downtown if it succeeds and if they are able to actually get funding and build housing.
Well, let me follow up on that then. When we go back to downtown, I mean, one of the things that's talked about a lot, in fact, Bruce Harrell mentioned this in his speech, is the idea of conversion of existing empty office space into potential housing. How realistic, Eric, in your opinion, how realistic is this as an idea? And is it in conflict with the idea of also simultaneously suggesting we need people back in downtown who are employees? Like, how do you see this?
I mean, I think it's realistic if you take the steps to do it. But I mean, what Harrell talked about in his speech was changing the zoning code. And I don't think the zoning code actually needs to change. Housing is allowed downtown. What needs to change is the structure, the structures themselves, making buildings, places. I mean, you can't just go live in an office space, right? So that's a lot of construction that would require incentives, that would require money. Again, things that are concrete, that are actions that you have to take, not just vibes that you have to express. So if he promised a suite of legislation coming to make that happen, I would be more confident. But right now, just saying maybe it would be cool to have a design competition is a long way away from actually making it happen.
Yeah, I think that design competition is a joke. I think that the people hired to do the job of figuring out housing should do the job of figuring out housing, not kicking the can down the road and outsourcing their responsibilities. I'm just curious. This is just a question. Maybe this is a question for Erica. Do we really believe that the mayor wants housing downtown in the first place? Because to me, it sounds like what we really want downtown is workers that can spend money. We want tourists that can spend money. We overblown Nike Town leaving and all of these things, because I'll tell you one thing, Mike, that I've done since I've been able to work from home. I've spent so much more money in my own community. When I came downtown every day and I was in that lunch crowd that you mentioned and I had to wait in those lines, I spent all my money downtown. Now I spend my money locally. I go to restaurants in my own neighborhood. I go to markets in my own neighborhood. And now my neighborhood benefits from people like me. The mayor seems to want to take that neighborhood money and throw it back to downtown. So my question is, does he really want people living there, or does he want more tourists and more workers?
That is such a good point, Mike. I mean, I like same thing. I mean, I work at home and I have for many years, but I would come downtown a lot more to go to city council meetings, things like that. And I think that part of, revisioning downtown or whatever probably does have to mean to be successful to mean, housing and other uses of space down there, because people are spending money in their neighborhoods. But I think every mayor, and particularly this mayor, wants to really overemphasize downtown as a place, a business, as a place to, where you need to sort of be obligated to buy your lunch every day. And I don't particularly, that doesn't resonate with me as a person who lives in a neighborhood and wants to support neighborhood businesses. But I think that you're right. I think that ultimately probably what the mayor envisions, as I was saying before, like just let's go, but let's get it back to when things were good and, and downtown was thriving. And, because frankly, neighborhood businesses, like if those business districts succeed and if there's more demand for neighborhood businesses, that means a lot of zoning changes in single family neighborhoods that, the mayor and his supporters are not going to support either.
All right. And also, I don't know that we have much of a choice in the matter of downtown, because it was the fastest growing residential neighborhood for the past decade. So they're there, and the mayor's going to have to figure out something. All right. We're going to take a short break, and we will be back with Week in Review in just a few minutes.
94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:33. Currently 36 degrees in Seattle, sunny, and we're expecting a high of 38. Overnight, partly cloudy with a low in the mid-20s.
All day long, we're looking for stuff. Where are my keys? Where did I save that file? What happened to my Orca card? Well, after another busy day of searching, let us bring some things to you for a change. Join me, Kim Malcolm, and All Things Considered as we bring you unexpected and fascinating stories, in-depth science and arts reporting, and news you can trust. Listen to All Things Considered every weekday afternoon on KUOW, starting at 3.
Support for KUOW comes from Save Shoreline Trees, whose mission is to protect tall conifer and native trees, working to provide environmental protections on public and private land. Tall trees can help prevent heat islands, provide health benefits, and protect wildlife habitat. More at SaveShorelineTrees.com.
Welcome back to Week in Review. I'm Mike Lewis, filling in somewhat ably for Bill Radke. We've got Publicola co-founder Erica Barnett, freelance health reporter Joanne Silberner, and of course KUOW arts and culture reporter Mike Davis. You can also stream this show on YouTube and on Facebook. Access to abortion and making Washington a healthcare sanctuary were prominent in the news last week. Then late Thursday, Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson joined other states in a lawsuit to force the Federal Drug Administration to provide consistent and better access to the common abortion pill. Joanne, we're going to start with you on this one. How important is this lawsuit?
Well, there's a fight going on now about, does the FDA was its approval of the first part? The abortion pill is actually a 2-part pill. Was its approval of the first part right and good? And it's coming from it's coming at the state level, looking at a national organization, the FDA, and it looked, before the last few years, you'd say, oh, well, of course, the FDA is going to have prominence, but it's not a done deal. So there are two things going on right now today judicially. One is this idea of the FDA shouldn't have approved it, and the other is what Bob Ferguson and the others are doing. And there's a risk that the first part of the pill is going to go away.
Let's back up for a minute. What does it mean, given the whole battery of initiatives? What does it mean for Washington State to become a healthcare sanctuary, if you will?
Well, it's going to cost some money. These training programs are somewhat limited. They can't just take everybody from nearby states. I know there are physicians and other health providers in Idaho who have come in to these Washington State programs. And at some point, we're going to run out of capacity to train them. So, then they have the choice. Some of them are actually moving here because some of the people who are already trained are moving here because this is where they can do what they know how to do and what they believe in. But if they're going to go back to their states, they may not be able to do it. And in fact, a lot of what's going on now with providers in some of the states where abortion has been severely limited, but still allowed to, in cases of an already occurring miscarriage or in other cases where the fetus is going to either be born dead or die soon after, it's allowed, but the providers reasonably are a little bit nervous because there are bounties on turning in people who are doing abortions that don't come under that. There's the idea of putting everything back into the judicial system that used to be in the medical system and letting the judicial system decide.
Erica, when you see the various initiatives that are in Washington State and the idea again of Washington State essentially becoming a training ground and a providing ground for other states, because we happen to be flanked by one state that's a couple of states that are probably going to backslide at least to some degree on abortion access. Do you think that this is what Washington State needs to be doing at this particular point?
Well, I do think we need to be doing it because nobody else is. I mean, it's, increasingly there are going to be sanctuary states, both for people seeking abortions, and for people wanting to at least have the training to provide miscarriage. Miscarriage management in other states where abortions and miscarriage management is abortion, but it's not called that, and Catholic hospitals will sometimes allow it. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will note, though, a cautionary note in Washington State: 41%, or it might be more, of our hospitals are run by Catholic institutions, and so they do not offer abortions and offer only limited, miscarriage management. So, so it's we're not saints here in terms of being a sanctuary for access.
Well, let me follow up on that, because there's something there that I think that wasn't clear. KUOW has a terrific story on this today. The idea of medical training, because what happens when access is denied in any given state is that the actual training of people able to do this stuff also is I don't know, it's not eliminated, but it definitely is mitigated. How important is it for Washington to be sort of a training ground for people to provide this sort of medical care?
Well, I mean, if nobody in these states are providing it, then, I think it is very important. And we do have limited capacity to do that in medical schools. But, I mean, just to kind of, bring the point home, I mean, when we're talking about these lawsuits over abortion pills, which very well could outlaw half of the abortion pill process, which is not medically indicated and all of that, we're talking about very early abortions. And so everything else is surgical. So that is the kind of thing you need training for,
right?
Even if pills become, available and, the Attorney General of Washington prevails and everything is, a little more settled. I mean, there's still this issue of surgical abortions, and that's what the training is for. And it is very necessary.
And it's also good, it's a 10-week, the pills are up to 10 weeks. So if you're at 8 weeks, excuse me, if you're at 8 weeks and you're looking around to go somewhere else, or you're in another state, you're in a state where it's not available, you're going to go over the 10-week mark pretty quickly.
Right. And also just the added expense of trying to get to somewhere else.
Right. And the resources. Yeah, it's enormous.
Mike, when you read about this, what strikes you as who is going to be most affected by a restricted access to this sort of medical care, to abortion access?
Well, I mean, I'm no expert, but if you live in a state where abortion is illegal, it's going to affect you. And I think that's going to go, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter anything else, because babies affect all of us. That's a human thing. I think that what the state of Washington is doing is critical. I think allowing professionals from other states to come to Washington and still get that training and still have that training is critical to communities, probably more important in communities outside of our state than in our state, because you need those doctors to be able to go back and have that training. And I guess this is me taking my journalist hat off, but optimistically speaking, I would hope that abortions won't be illegal forever. And if we get some laws reversed, we need professionals who are ready to step in immediately.
Well, Joanne, let me ask you then. I mean, I think to Mike's point, the idea that, and some folks who are not for universal abortion access would suggest that this is the way it always should have been handled. It should be different. From states should be able to make the decision on whether or not, and that obviously that doesn't match with earlier Supreme Court decisions. It certainly matches with later ones. What do you think? I mean, do you think that the states should be deciding this, or do you think that this should be a universal thing provided in every state? I think I know the answer.
I think that healthcare access, and this is a healthcare issue to me, should be universal and shouldn't be state by state decision. And that's a political analysis on my part, or maybe not political. But speaking as a healthcare reporter who believes that everyone should have access to healthcare, and this is a healthcare issue, I think it should be national.
Erica, when you see the Bob Ferguson, I mean, sometimes he's been accused of not finding a lawsuit he didn't like, because he's entered into a lot of them. But in this particular one, the idea about the FDA and a restricted access to the pill, to the abortion pill, what do you think that this was one that he should have joined, or do you feel like this is one that he was just essentially doing, a reflexive Bob Ferguson joining another lawsuit?
Well, I mean, I should say, I think a lot of the lawsuits Bob Ferguson has joined in have been good lawsuits to join.
Fair enough.
And, I'm not against an attorney general being a little bit
Litigious?
active. Yeah, litigious. I mean, exactly.
Proactive.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think, so he's not the only, I haven't read the lawsuit, but he's not the only attorney general. I believe it's 12 that have joined this lawsuit so far. It's just a slippery slope. I mean, with banning, one half of the protocol for abortions,
Right.
It becomes more dangerous. It's actually a shorter time period. It's 9 weeks that you can just use the one pill that it's indicated for. And it's not as safe. You're sort of doing it in a different way. And the next thing that will happen is they'll figure out a way to ban the second pill, even though that pill is, used off label sometimes. And it serves other purposes medically. But it's not like they're going to stop with just the one. And I saw a story this week from the AP that I just really was kind of infuriated by, that said, essentially women will still be able to get abortions. Well, women can't get abortions. People can't get abortions in a lot of states right now. And to say, oh, well, at least they have the second pill still, is just kind of ignoring the whole history of abortion rights in this country. Including, the time when everybody said, well, they'll never overturn Roe v. Wade. Well, they did. So let's not just kind of make these assumptions that, if we don't push back on stuff like this, it'll be fine.
But also this idea of second guessing the FDA. Now, I've had my problems with the FDA recently. They've come up with some screwy decisions, but if you set a precedent where you can go after a drug that's been FDA approved on a state by state basis, or even on a national basis, what other drugs are, it's going to set a pattern. It's opening a door that I don't think should be opened.
Well, to your point about other drugs, let's talk a little bit about what Washington State is trying to do regarding access to other regular prescription medication. And let's go specifically with insulin. Washington State is trying to mandate price. And now we've all read the stories about insulin, what insulin costs to make, and then what we are charged for insulin. And obviously that is essential to health for a whole bunch of people in Washington State, not to mention the country, not to mention the world. When you see the states trying to essentially dictate the price of a pharmaceutical, do you think that this is something that's within a state's power to do effectively? I mean, it's a lot of the push has been, let's do this federally and let's make it universally inexpensive, especially with the federal buying power. Can Washington State actually have an effect on insulin prices?
Well, Washington State plays a big role as a healthcare purchaser. It's, through Apple Health and also through state employees. There's a lot of people insured that way. And that's where Washington State has entered this. It's controlling the prices there. With private insurance, not so much.
And Mike, when you see the issue of, let's just say, healthcare, when people are literally making decisions between groceries and their pharmaceuticals or housing, issues like that, this issue stretches well beyond insulin being affordable, correct?
Absolutely. The issue is capitalism, period. Capitalism, I heard a smart economist say, capitalism is great for things you want, but it's terrible for things you need. Like, we can buy all the frivolous stuff that we want at any given moment, but you talking about insulin specifically just illustrates capitalism gets in the way of health. Capitalism gets in the way of our livelihoods. And I don't even believe that it should be on the states to regulate this. It should be federal. It's just, that's a scary thing to say right now because where we are with the feds. So it's just it's a tough time. It's a tough time to be an American right now.
And all that's happened federally on insulin, the Democrats were pushing for the Inflation Reduction Act for everyone to be capped at $35 a month. And all they were able to get was Medicare.
Right. And it seemed like our state was leaning on the feds to get that through so that we could just keep it rolling. And then it didn't happen. So I think we're in a place right now where individual states have to step up. Somebody has to do something.
Erica, when you see these issues, when you see Washington State enter into the fray on affordable pharmaceuticals and affordable prescriptions, do you think that Washington State, I mean, it's got obviously a lot on the list of things that Washington State is being asked to do at this particular juncture. Do you feel like this one should be like near the top of Jay Inslee's list?
Well, I would flip that even and say, why do the Republicans in Congress want insulin in particular to be out of the price range of so many Americans? I mean, it just seems like such a losing political issue. If nothing else, if you're just a craven politician, so many people have diabetes in this country and need insulin. So I find that bizarre. I do think, I often, I'm from Texas and before that Mississippi. So like two of the worst states for all of this stuff, and battleground states on all these issues we're talking about, including healthcare prices. And I often feel very lucky that I live here. Because I think just because everything is now sort of atomized at the state level and we do have to pass these laws that, keep things affordable at the state level, I just feel very lucky, and I feel very sad that we don't live in a country where everybody is lucky. And so, I think if the state can do it, they should do it. And they should make it not a matter of, debate every year, but a permanent thing.
Right. And I think it's worth mentioning that when you look at how it's been pushed through the Washington state legislature, it's been people who have children or relatives with diabetes. They get it. And that's what astounds me on the federal level. There've got to be some Republicans out there who are who understand how important insulin is, and because of family issues the way we have it here. Why? I don't know why it hasn't gained any kind of traction there.
Well, I wonder the same thing about addiction a lot too, with these sort of throw them in jail approaches to addiction that you see from Republicans nationally. Everybody has addiction, within their families or within 1 or 2 degrees of them in their lives. And yet we keep proposing bad ideas.
Well, abortion is in the same place. So I think that Republicans, they take a lot of stances that you think will be losing stances, but it seems like the harder they stand, the more successful they are with their constituency.
All right, we're going to take another short break. We'll be back with Week in Review in just a few minutes.
Support for KUOW comes from Maxwell Graham, personal injury attorneys providing dedicated advocacy for clients who may have experienced negligence, assisting other attorneys with complex litigation. More information at maxwellgraham.com.
I'm Julian Marshall, host of BBC NewsHour. On today's program, the war in Ukraine, 1 year on. We look back on 12 months of suffering through the eyes of a woman whose mother was killed by the Russians. And why have so many countries remained neutral in the conflict?
Those stories and much, much more today on BBC NewsHour. It begins at 1 p.m. right after Week in Review on 94.9 KUOW Seattle.
Support for KUOW comes from Marano Senior Living, a Seattle-based leisure care community offering independent assisted living and their memory care program, now featuring an educational virtual dementia program for families. More information and tour scheduling at MaranoSeniorLiving.com.
I'm Mike Lewis. I'm filling in for Bill Radke this week on Week in Review. Joining us are Publicola co-founder Erica Barnett, freelance health reporter Joanne Silberner, and KUOW arts and culture reporter Mike Davis, who is going to be on the hot seat for this session. Mm-hmm. All right. And you can also stream the show on YouTube and Facebook. Mike, I guess you could fairly call it controversial artificial intelligence software, ChatGPT. It's one of the many that are actually out there right now, has been heavily debated for its role in the classrooms and in journalism, with its limitations still being tested. But you reported that ChatGPT is becoming part of the conversation in the art world. Tell us more.
Yeah, I met a guy, a local guy, Carl Stead,
an actual person,
a real person, and I thought I was gonna hate this guy. I was prepared to badger this guy as a reporter. I was going to go hard on him. And he was so charming, I couldn't do it. He wrote a book in 7 hours using ChatGPT. It was published.
The one published on Amazon, correct? Yeah.
That fast. I was supposed to meet him on a Friday. We met, didn't get the interview. I met him the following Monday, and he had already published his second book. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And
did you read either book?
I read his first book. Read his first book. It was interesting. It was interesting. I would say I don't think authors should be afraid. And I think that's the place that I've landed. And I'm so curious to know what my esteemed panelists think. I know what I think. I've reported. I'm just curious what everyone else thinks. But I'm not afraid anymore, Mike. Chat GPT can imitate us, but it can never be us. Like we're better than the machine today. Don't ask me about tomorrow.
Erica, what do you think?
Yeah, well, the machine, unfortunately, I mean, it's just us, right? And this is, I mean, as a journalist, I've played around with it quite a bit, doing, not fiction, but nonfiction. And, all it's doing is recycling, a sort of random assortment of things that it draws from. And so, you ask it to write a story and it will either make up a quote. Usually it makes up quotes. Sometimes it'll draw a quote from, a previously posted story that somebody else got, which is copyright infringement. And so, I mean, there's just, I'm not worried about journalism or art. I mean, you're talking about science fiction. I mean, we could have like a whole offline conversation about like why science fiction requires, just the kind of brilliance of a human brain to work and to cohere. And yeah, I think recycling a random assortment of ideas from the internet is, I'm not going to say never, because but in the next 10 years or so, I'm not too worried.
What do you think, though? And let me ask you this first, Joanne. What do you think about this as an idea? Now, this is not just ChatGPT. This is also Midjourney. This is all kinds of things that are doing visual arts as well as textual arts. Do you think that someone like me, for example, putting in X data, parameters, questions, and then it creating the art, do you think that is classically, as we understand it, art?
No, not at all. And I want to ask Mike that, there are programs where you can sort of deprogram something that was, look at something and run it through and say, was this done by a computer? And there was a teacher on KUOW who said that she had tried it on a few things and it wasn't 100% accurate. It got fooled every once in a while, but not 100%. Are there programs that will look at a piece of art and say, oh, will recognize it as generated by a computer?
I am not aware of a program that can do it the same way that it's being done in the classroom. And I do think that those are separate issues. I think students finding a way to not have to write their term papers
has been since the beginning of time anyway.
And when I spoke to a teacher in my reporting, and that's literally what he said. He said, easy bib. And he listed all of these things that kids have done. He said, kids will always cheat, especially in college. This is just the new way that they're doing it. I think in art, the biggest problem is copyright infringement. I think that especially with the illustrations, some of these programs will kick out an illustration that will still have the original author's signature on it. So it's like they stole it. Getty Images actually has a lawsuit right now, and it's not against OpenAI. It's against a different software, but they hit 12 million images from wow. Getty's library. And Getty's like, nah, those are ours. So copyright infringement will be a thing moving forward. We just need to see a case hit the Supreme Court. But to answer your question, Mike, no, absolutely not. You yourself are not about to get on a program if you've never done art and be able to create art better than any artist. And even the artists that I've met, some of whom exclusively use AI software now, they were all artists already. So like they're using this as a tool.
As a new tool.
Yeah. So it'll be like you picking up a DSLR camera, a digital camera for the first time after never taking a photo. You're not going to be able to take a better picture than an actual photographer that understands the layering of images and the coloring and the angles. Like there's so much dynamics that go into art that real artists are not going to be threatened by everyday people picking up programs.
Well, then let's go one step further down that. When you look at art, do you think there should be some sort of level of technical expertise in the artist? Because what we're talking about here is sort of removing that technical expertise in favor of the idea expertise.
Okay, I'm going to pick on Carl, and I like Carl. Carl, I'm sorry I got to do this to you, but his novel read like really, really similar.
And Carl is the writer of the
Carl
book.
Stedman. Yeah. Yes, Carl Stedman. And I encourage people to read his book. But
you don't sound like you're strongly encouraging.
His book. It's not really his book.
I mean,
no,
the thing is, it read really, really similar to stories that my 9-year-old writes, where like there's characters in the book that you never meet. They just appear. There's no backstory. The story is about an AI taking over a spaceship because it wants the same rights as humans, but it never describes.
Like 2001.
Yes, it never describes the spaceship. It never describes space. It doesn't tell you anything. It's like the whole story was written in bullet points and the bullet points got removed. So like that is a long way from reading an actual novel that is by a human, kind of like what Erica described. Now, there are people making those type of novels in partnership with AI, and those people spend years with AI flushing those novels out, and they always publish in partnership. They're not tricking anybody. They're not fooling anybody. Not to say that Carl did, but everybody in AI lets people know that this is what they're doing.
Erica, you're not worried that you can be replaced on Publicola?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, people sort of make fun of, the sort of basic form of journalism sometimes because, like AP style, because it can sort of be replicated. But the work of doing journalism is investigating, it's interviewing people, it's having empathy, and it's describing, it's bringing people into the story and making them relate and care. And no, I don't think an AI that's, making up quotes. I mean, I've made up a lot of stories on ChatGPT just for the hell of it. And
I started sending actually invitation responses. I had ChatGPT write my invitation responses. Essentially kept telling me to make sure my values were aligned with whatever the party's values are.
Yeah. So no, I'm not worried because I think, but I do think it leads to the devaluing of journalism because people, have no idea what journalism is or what we do. And so I think that, people, on the outside of arts and journalism and writing and whatever, may think that this, that we can be replaced, but I don't think it's that easy.
All right. We're wrapping up our show here. One quick one-word response on your smile, Mike Davis.
Bumper shoot.
Coming back. Absolutely. Joanne?
Bruce Springsteen with an asterisk because of the way the tickets were sold. I'm going in Seattle.
And you're going to be
Portland.
making payments on those tickets for a while, I assume. Yeah. And
Ovid's The Metamorphoses at the Rep. This is the final weekend. Go check it out.
All right. That was Week in Review. I'm Mike Lewis filling in for Bill Radke. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Mike Davis, for joining us.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Mike. Good job.